I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a rainy night, and I was just finishing up my latest 400-hour work week of consuming and devouring lost anime catgirls in the streets of Tokyo. I returned home to my gaming setup to find that I was at a crossroads in my life. Indeed, it was time to make the decision that all autistic gamers must one day make. The choice between highly distilled video game crack masquerading as a factory game, or with equally pure video game crack, but with attractive anime women. Well, I should be fine since I don't have an addictive personality. Factorio. On the outside, it looks like any other video game. However, this is incorrect. Because Walter White could not produce crack this refined. You start the game shortly after you attempted to prove that drunk drivers are not the problem, but drunk crashers are. And taking a look at the ship, you'll soon realize that just like your first marriage, it is not salvageable. Soon enough, you'll begin wandering around, and shortly enough, you'll find your first resource patch, wherein you will soon realize the suspicious lack of red, white, and blue flags. And not too long after you've begun to set up, do you realize that maybe, just maybe, you can automate this. After which 2 miners become 10, and 1 hour becomes... Now, you would think after playing Factorio for almost 1,400 hours that I would have some sort of idea as to what I'm even playing as. But Factorio is a very free-form experience that doesn't really give a lot of explanation for anything that's happening. Much like
chicken jockey!
So let's look at the evidence and break down the facts and see if we can figure out
what the fuck is the Factorio Engineer?
We'll start off with the size of the engineer, since this will help us determine a lot of the other statistics later down the line. Now, figuring out the size of the engineer might seem straightforward, but it's actually a little bit more complex. Because while you have things like trees, vehicles, and buildings in the game, we simply don't have a reliable way to tell just how big these vehicles are, since these are all custom vehicles and buildings built by the engineer due to him being stranded on the planet. For all we know, the car could be an RC toy or a...
Introducing the all-new Ford Armageddon, a truck for the whole family.
So if everything we see on screen in the game has an undetermined size, then how do we measure anything? The secret is weight. With the release of Space Age, we are now able to definitively determine exactly how much an object weighs by placing it into a rocket and having it just tell us. But this by itself doesn't help us. We have access to the mass, but not the density. Even well-known elements like iron and copper can still have varying densities depending on how pure they are.
Know your f***ing place, trash!
So we'll need to find something that we can determine the density of. Water is the key. It has a consistent density as long as we know the solubility and the temperature. We can ensure the water is fresh by boiling it, and then, just by looking at the game, it can tell us the temperature. So returning to the formula from earlier, we input our density, then we get the weight of the water by putting a water barrel into the rocket, which tells us the weight, and then putting an empty barrel into the rocket, which tells us the empty barrel's weight. Then we just subtract the empty barrel's weight from the total mass of the water barrel, and we have the weight of our water. So, let's do some math, set to some appropriate music.
Cause there is no cock like horse cock. Send your asshole into shock. You need horse cock, cause horse cock. Grab the lube and slam the day away. Mash shaft is quivering, my balls are turning. As I think of drinking in a foot or even two. My favorite stallion that I keep in my top drawer. Slip it in and I'll be dripping through. As I take more cock, horse cock. Shut the door and turn the lock. Is your cock the horse cock?
So now we have the volume of water that is inside the barrel, but how do we know if the barrel is full or not? We know the barrel is full due to the pressure differential between all the planets. Because if there was any empty space in the barrel, it would immediately be crushed upon touching down on Vulcanus' surface. With the last variable in the way for our measurement perfection being how thick the sides and the roof of the steel barrel are. But this ends up being negligible since 5 kilograms of steel doesn't make too much of a barrel. And so with all that out of the way, we can finally utilize our barrel's height of 18.54 centimeters? Or about 7.3 inches in the glorious nation of Myanmar's perfect measurement system without flaws. Regardless, now that we have a definitive measurement system, we can use this to accurately measure the actual height of the engineer.
I am small.
Oh no, this can't be.
Now let's discuss power. Now, it might be tempting to measure the strength of the engineer by simply filling up his inventory with the heaviest item in the game and calculating how much he can carry. But if you did that, then you would be
Wrong. No way. No.
The first issue with this is that at all times, the engineer is wearing some kind of suit that could potentially augment his strength in some way that we are not entirely privy to. And that doesn't even take into account just how weird the engineer's inventory system is, but we'll get into that later. So that leaves us with only two methods of determining strength. The engineer's ability to throw tiny objects, and his ability to hit minerals. Now, the engineer's pickaxe arm doesn't really do much for us, but the grenade throw distance does. And we know that these are thrown because it literally says thrown right there. Just open your eyes. Don't make me bust out the GIF again. So now all we have to do is convert our standard barrel measurement system into something more easy to use. Then we take our Mythbusters measuring board and measure our boy's throwing arm. So we get 40.5 feet. Now we just weigh the grenade in the rocket, and 88 pounds! This toddler is able to make half-court shots with fucking bags of concrete. Regardless, let's take a look at the math required to find the energy of a thrown object. Well, fuck that.
I've got something in my front pocket for you. Why don't you reach out in my pocket and see what it is? Then grab onto it, it's just for you.
Oof. Kids these days are screwed. Determining speed should be pretty simple. We simply line up our engineer to do a quick 100 tile sprint down our patented Mythbusters measuring stick and time how long it takes them to make the trip. And of course, without any performance enhancing exoskeletons as well. So now we do our first grade math, and we get 13.7 meters per second, or 30.6 miles an hour. Which isn't crazy fast, but it still breaks the world record for the fastest 100 meter sprint, so get fucked, Usain.
Build, construct, conquer.
Next up is durability. And unlike size, speed, and power, there isn't exactly an exact mathematical way to determine how resistant the engineer is to being yeeted off this mortal coil. So we'll just have to go over every aspect of his survivability individually. So let's go through everything in a quick fire round through song. Get hit by a train, get eaten by biters, get burned alive where you stand. Fly into some asteroids without no protection, be crushed, get hit by a train. Manslaughter yourself, drink game or go water, have lava appear under you. Sub 4 demolisher, B2 conky explode, get hit by a train. Forget the range if you're throwing grenades, stand on a lake, a vulgar mishake. Your turrets betrayed you, spell Asbogel's room, nick yourself, get hit by a train. Go AFK on a rocket in space, eat a tank shell right to the face. Be ungloved, get hit by a friend, Victor Brukernoff, don't run that test. Face fuck a railgun, get spat on by spitters, hit enter while riding a train. Forget you had eggs, get struck by lightning, explode, get hit by a train. So from all that, let's gather some points about the engineer's survivability and list them out as so. Now let's quickly eliminate everything from this list that has too many variables. Since the engineer appears to be wearing a type of padded clothing the whole time, let's remove anything here that the armor could potentially protect him from. Dying to nukes and stuff falling from space is nice and all, but doesn't really help us since the engineer will always die to these things no matter what unless he has more protective armor. We know that his susceptibility to poison and his lack of needing to breathe are accurate since his concept art depicts him without a pressurized suit. And finally, we have the engineer's susceptibility to being hit by a train. Since this is by far the most measurable and testable option we have, we'll be using it to determine how many G-forces the engineer can take before he takes the big sleep. With the most efficient method being what the medical community and Mythbusters were too afraid to do, copious amounts of human testing with little regard for safety. And to do this, I brought in my intern, who is being generously paid in exposure, Fortnite V-Bucks, and my appreciation. Utilizing this railroad design, my intern bravely stood on the railroad tracks as I flung high-speed locomotives at him. We ran this over and over and over again with all the different types of fuels, with the goal being to find the minimum amount of speed required by a train to kill the engineer. And after a lot of testing, and I do mean a lot of testing, I've cut out about 90% of the time here, but boy, we went through a lot of interns. I mean, they retired peacefully. And throughout all of our testing, we got 3 good runs, which I believe get us as close as we possibly can get with these circumstances to dying. So after gathering our data and doing more cringe math, as well as a very scientific educated guess, we can now determine the worst case scenario for each one of these impacts, and then average them all together to get our 35.33 Gs. A frankly absurd amount of G-forces. Now, to be fair, I did cut some corners on the calculations, but this is still relatively in the ballpark since I had to make a lot of assumptions anyway. But to put that number into perspective, this is on the lower end for orbital collisions, which puts the Factorio Engineer in the same category as Master Chief, wherein they both are able to fall from orbit and survive, but somehow get killed by, getting punched. The intelligence of the engineer is definitely something difficult to measure, but I think we can still kind of get a rough estimate. Now, it might be tempting just to assume the engineer is a super genius that was able to invent all this high-tech stuff from scratch, but I don't buy it, and I'll show you why in a second. So the engineer has these lines of dialogue that only occur during the tutorial missions of Factorio, and this is the only time we get to know what's going on in the Factorio engineer's head, besides thoughts of indigenous genocide. Most of the dialogue is pretty standard for someone who just crash landed on an alien planet, but there are some lines of dialogue that really cut deep into the intricacies of just how intelligent this man is. Lines like,
I wonder if I could use something from the escape pod.
like, yeah, no shit, idiot, that's like the first place you should look. And there's also this line, which he says immediately after crafting one of the simplest items in the entire game.
Great, I learned something today.
It's lines like this one and several others sprinkled throughout the tutorial that imply that the engineer didn't have any clue what he was doing before he got here and that he's learning along with us. And that does make sense because a later line in one of the tutorials also shows that canonically the engineer is researching things. That's not just a game mechanic for our sake. And all this makes sense because the engineer, just like the player, has access to the Factoriopedia, a tiny little booklet that gives access to any information you could possibly want about any item in the game, whether you've researched it or not. It is quite literally an encyclopedia. So while there are certain lines of dialogue that do show the engineer does have some technical knowledge, I think all of this points to the fact that the engineer is about the intelligence level of a dad from IKEA putting together furniture, just kind of looking at the booklet and figuring out how to make things from there. Our boy is building with Legos in the most environmentally irresponsible way possible, and I couldn't be prouder. After all, messing with nature couldn't possibly have dire consequences that we could not foresee. So in this last section, let's go over the things I've been willfully ignoring up until now. First and foremost is the engineer's inventory system. Essentially, all items appear to change size depending on where they're stored. Inventories in general are pretty inconsistent in size, Like, the car backpack can be smaller than your actual character's backpack, somehow. And yes, I already hear you. Obviously, it is a video game, and it's not supposed to make sense, it's just supposed to work. But to that I say, God, aren't you fun to be around? What is this you? Is this you at parties? You sad fuck? Regardless, it doesn't change the fact that the inventory system is very weird, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But here's my best guess at how it could potentially work. Basically, the way I see it is that all the items on the belts, on the ground, or in our inventory are not actually the physical items themselves, but a sort of digital digi-struct version of them. And all of the inventory spaces in the game are actually insanely high-tech and futuristic digital storage devices that are capable of turning physical matter into digital data in the blink of an eye, that you also are able to make out of 2 pieces of wood. And last, but certainly not least, the engineer's most powerful ability, the fact that he is our Lord and Savior, apparently. And I mean, there really is just no way to sugarcoat it. The engineer is just capable of respawning after he dies, no matter the circumstance. And he'll always respawn back on the same spot on the planet that he died on. There's no logic to it, no scientific explanation, nothing. So to close things off, what is the engineer? Well, if we ignore the blatantly magical abilities he has, I think it's a pretty safe bet to assume that he's a sort of genetically enhanced human with a lot of human knowledge on hand. A sort of cyborg is also a good possibility, but I find it hard to believe the engineer wouldn't be able to scavenge metal from his own body if he were a cyborg. Although the truest way to answer that question is that the engineer is a force of nature. The moment he touches down on a planet, all of its inhabitants are in danger. A quasi-immortal being with unlimited access to all of the knowledge its species has accrued over who knows how long, and it's just landed down on your planet, it's no wonder the natives of all the planets react so violently to your presence. But anyways, thanks for watching, and remember,
Factory must grow.
Iron wheels grind and sparks will fly. Steel and smoke rise to pierce the sky. Engines roar as the planet cries. Fighters fall while the empire thrives. Pollution's haze is our battle song. Through war and ash we march along. Stompers crushed beneath our tread. Demolishers broken, left for dead. Gears of war spin without a sound. Taking planets, breaking ground. Through the smog, our banners wave. Claiming all, no world to save. Pollution's haze is our battle song. Through war and ash we march along. Stompers crushed beneath our tread. Demolishers broken, left for dead. We carve the stars with iron might, harvesting worlds in endless night. The blackened air, our empire's crown. Biters bow as we burn them down.